Hello and welcome to another update. In this one, we'll be continuing the latest updates on the Ukraine offensive here in this summer. So from the last update, the Ukrainian forces continue their attacks south of Oryhiv, as well as in the direction of Lobkove, as well as by the Velika Novosilka front line. Here in this part of the front line, the Ukrainians have seen some success where they've managed to capture the villages of Neskushne as well as Blaodatne, here south of Velika Novosilka. They've also managed to advance and are now fighting in the direction of Urushaini. So the Ukrainian forces have managed to make a significant advance here to the south of Velika Novosilka, in between the two river lines to the northeast and to the west of that position. So this advance is actually very interesting because we see that there are some large fields here to the south of this area, which means that this is generally an open field. And then there are some villages by the river line. So most likely the Russian defenses actually was focused on the western bank of the river line, which could indicate that the Ukrainians mostly advanced and took control over these villages, as the Russians most likely withdrew from these positions across the river line. And I say that because if we look at Deep State Maps map, we see here that the geographical difference is that the western part of this river line actually has the high ground and the eastern part is on the low ground, which means that as long as you stay on the western parts, then you will have the height advantage across the eastern part. So we see that the Ukrainian forces have managed to advance and capture these positions. However, it will be difficult for them to hold them, as Russian forces will have the high ground opposed by the opposite side of the river. However, the Ukrainians managing to capture this shows that they are either one of two things. They are either grinding down and exhausting the Russian forces, or that they are intensifying their attacks. So based on that, we can see that there is some progress with this offensive. These probing attacks are just showing exactly where the Russian forces are defending, where the defenses are. We could estimate and predict that the Russians would use these high grounds here to the west of the river line to use their defenses there, mainly to prevent a Ukrainian attack. But now it's been confirmed and it's clearer now. Also, something that I did was to give a proper perspective as to the progress and the situation on the front line. I decided to add some positions where I showed the first line of defense of the Russian defenses, as well as all of the important villages and cities across the front line here between Mariupol and Melitopol. So in the direction of Velika Novosilka, there is one important village to the north of the first defensive line, and that is Starominivka. And as we can see, it is south of these positions. If the Ukrainians want to take control over all of these parts to the north of the defensive line, they need to take control over Staromilnivka. So the fact that they're attacking here by the east indicates that they have detected a weak spot in the Russian defenses and are taking advantage of that to reach this important village of Staromilnivka, which will allow them to reach the first line of defense of the Russian forces. So what we are seeing is that there are some important points if we look at the topographical map, and that is, first of all, by the river line. If the Ukrainians manage to capture Starominivka, then they'll be able to cross over this river line and attack the first line of defense of the Russian forces. As well as cutting off this road junction right here would disable most of the supplies going in and out of this whole part of the front line, which means that if the Ukrainians manage to capture the village of Starominivka, then essentially the Russians would have to withdraw from this whole salient over here to the north, back to the defensive line. So by capturing this village, they would essentially capture all of these parts to the north of the first defensive line, except for the villages of Lyubimivka, Orlinske, Novoseltopil, and Krasnolevivka, as these are all in connection with the first defensive line and are forward positions the Russians will still be able to hold. But the rest of the front line here to the north, all of this would have to be abandoned, and they must return to the front line, to the first defensive line, if they are to be cut off by Staromilnivka. So this is most definitely the Ukrainian target of this offensive push here to the north and south of Velika Novosilka. So this indicates that the village of Novodonetsk is actually very important, as well as Oktyabrsky, as these will allow the Ukrainian forces to flank the further villages here by the river line, and also prevent the Russians from taking advantage of the high ground if they're able to take the villages here to the east, which is why we have seen the Russians continuously counterattack in this direction to prevent the Ukrainians from holding the village of Novodonetsk, as it will allow them to gain an advantage that would be very significant for capturing Seremenivka, which is the most important village here by the first defensive line. Before we get into the spicy stuff of this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, as it helps me out a lot. Also check out my Patreon and a PayPal link in the description if you want to help me out further than that. And let's move on with the video. And then if we take a look at the rest of them, we have the village of Volnovakha, which is here to the southeast of Uledar. This one is very important because it covers a very important road junction that goes between Russia, Donetsk, and Mariupol. It connects all three of these areas, and it is by the end of the first defensive line in the Zaporizhia region, going into the Donetsk region, and also that the main supplies going in and out of this area towards Donetsk goes through here, the railway between Mariupol and Donetsk, as well as if the Ukrainians plan on attacking in the direction of Mariupol, then you must capture this village. Then we have a further two villages, Menhush and Nikolske, which are to the northwest of Mariupol. These are also important as they are further road junctions west of Mariupol, connecting the Mariupol city with the rest of the front line, especially in the direction of Berdyansk. So if the Ukrainians are attacking in the direction of Berdyansk, then they would be attacking in this direction, as they would be able to capture these road junctions, which would prevent any support coming from the direction of Mariupol. Which is why the villages of Polohy, Bilmak, and Osipenko are all important as well. Then we take a look at the village of Tokmak, which is here to the south of Orikhiv. This is very important as this is the main road junction between the east and the west, and this is the most important one to hold for the Ukrainian forces if they want to attack in the direction of Melitopol. So if the Ukrainians plan to attack Melitopol, they have to go through Tokmak. So this increases the value of Polohy as well as Vasyukivka here to the west. So with these three areas, the Ukrainian forces would be able to attack in the direction of Melitopol, as well as cut off most supply lines between the east and the west of the land bridge between Russia and Crimea. Then we have further two villages north of Melitopol, which are very important if the Ukrainian forces plan to capture all of this, and if they want to cut off Melitopol from all supply lines to the east and to the west of the city. So mainly these areas are the most important parts if the Ukrainians want to launch an offensive to cut off the land bridge between Russia and Crimea. And as such, we have this first line of defense, which is shown very clearly. It is about 5 to 10 kilometers from the front line in most cases. So with this, we can see that the Russian forces are going to hold this first defensive line at all costs, because if the Ukrainians manage to breach this first defensive line, then they can threaten many of the villages that are essential for the Russian defenses, especially in the defense of Melitopol, Mariupol, and Berdyansk. However, there are still many other defensive lines. It will take too long for me to cover all of them, to draw them out. So I'll be doing it partially as it becomes more relevant, as when the Ukrainians are able to breach through the first defensive line, then I'll draw the second one. If they aren't able to do it, then I will not draw it. Then we can look at the situation on the front line. By the Orikhiv area, we see that there are further two videos of Leopard tanks being destroyed. So these are reported to be Leopard 2A4s. I have a hard time discerning the difference between a 2A4 and a 2A6. However, they are very clearly Leopard tanks, as there is the important discerning factor, which is the shape of the turret and the two hatches, both at the turret as well as on the platform behind it. Then there's also this video of the effects of the breach of the dam of Novokhorovka. So the explosion of Novokhorovka Dam has had severe influence on the flooding as well as the water levels of the Dnieper River, especially here to the south of the city of Zaporizhia, So this video created by Deep State Map shows a lot of the changes that has happened due to the flooding. We see here that there are multiple villages as well as islands being completely flooded, as well as the river lines being overflown because of the dam being breached and blown up. And that is all for this update. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.